You can't touch that, sister. But music is God's gift. In the quiet heart of Harmony Creek, an elderly nun named Sister Agnes finds her simple, faith-filled life upended when a rigid new manager at St. Jude's Community Center declares her beloved antique piano off limits. What seems like a trivial squabble over an old instrument soon blossoms into a poignant battle for the soul of a community, forcing Agnes to revisit a heartbreaking past, a silent promise made long ago, and the forgotten melodies of a life once filled with soaring aspirations. As the echoes of injustice threaten to silence not just her music, but the very spirit of her small town, Sister Agnes, frail but unwavering, will embark on an unexpected journey that will challenge her faith, ignite a defiant spirit, and ultimately stun a world that had long forgotten the profound power of grace. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. You can't touch that, sister. But music is God's gift. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, slicing through the usual gentle hum of St. Jude's Community Center like a discordant note. Sister Agnes, her gnarled fingers hovering just above the yellowed ivory keys of the old Baldwin upright, flinched. Her heart, usually a steady drum of peace, fluttered like a trapped bird. She slowly turned. Her gaze, though softened by 78 years of prayer and quiet service, held a flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of something deeper, a memory, long buried, now stirring. Before her stood Mr. Harrison, the new interim manager, a man who, in just 3 weeks, had managed to replace the faded warmth of St. Jude's with a chilling efficiency. His suit, impeccably pressed, seemed to suck the color from the sun-drenched common room. His smile, when it appeared, was more a professional display than a genuine expression, and his eyes, cold and precise, seemed to miss the most important things entirely. Like the way the children's laughter echoed off the high ceilings, or the quiet comfort the elderly found in its familiar nooks, or how that very piano, chipped and out of tune, had been the heart of countless small joys. Sister Agnes, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice devoid of any real deference, I believe I made it clear in my memo. The common room piano is off limits. It's an antique, a liability, and frankly, a distraction. He gestured vaguely at the instrument, as if it were a pile of old newspapers. Agnes's lips, usually curved in a serene smile, thinned slightly. Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, this piano has been a part of St. Jude's for, well, longer than I have. Children learn their first notes here. The seniors sing hymns. It's not merely an antique, it's a conduit for joy, for faith. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Joy doesn't factor into the budget, sister. And faith, as I understand it, can be found without a dusty, decrepit instrument taking up valuable space. This center needs to be modernized, streamlined. We're cutting down on non-essential activities. His gaze lingered on her old, threadbare habit, then flicked back to the piano. That piano will be moved to storage next week. Until then, I must insist you refrain. Agnes felt a profound ache settle in her chest, a familiar heaviness she hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't just the piano. It was the casual disregard for something sacred, something imbued with history and human connection. It was the way he saw only wood and wire, not the echo of tiny hands fumbling for middle C, not the solace it offered to lonely hearts, not the way its sometimes clunky melody filled the quiet corners of this building, a building that had been her home, her calling, for 50 years. Harmony Creek, nestled in the gentle curve of the Appalachian foothills, was a place where progress often moved at the pace of the seasons, not the hurried rhythm of spreadsheets. St. Jude's, with its peeling paint and creaking floorboards, was the beating heart of that rhythm. A sanctuary not just for the faithful, but for anyone seeking a moment of respite from the world. It was a place where stories were shared over lukewarm coffee, where children learned to read from worn-out books, and where the echoes of simple human connection reverberated through every hall. To Agnes, Mr. Harrison's directives felt like a cold wind blowing through a cherished garden, threatening to uproot its oldest, most resilient flowers. She looked at her hands, still suspended in the air. These hands, gnarled now by time and tireless work, had once danced across the keys with a youthful exuberance, a passion that burned brighter than any candlelight. Before the habit, before the vows, there had been a girl, Agnes Marie Dubois, whose world revolved around scales and sonatas, whose heart beat in rhythm with Mozart and Chopin. Her parents, humble but visionaries, had scrimped and saved to send her to the bustling city for lessons, believing fiercely in the divine spark they saw in her nimble fingers. They had dreamed of grand concert halls, of standing ovations, of a life far more expansive and resonant than their simple farm in Harmony Creek could ever offer. Their dreams for her were as vast and open as the sky above their fields. But then, the Great Depression had swept through their small farming community, stripping away everything with the ruthless efficiency of a winter storm. The farm, their meager savings, her precious lessons, all gone, and with them, the unspoken promise she'd made to her parents, to herself, to a God she believed had blessed her with an undeniable gift. The choice had been clear, stark, and utterly heartbreaking. Pursue her own soaring dreams, or help her family survive the crushing weight of destitution. She had chosen the latter, finding solace not in the thunderous roar of a concert grand, but in the quiet, steadfast service of the church, here at St. Jude's. The Baldwin upright in the common room, with its familiar nicks and slightly sharp high C, had become her secret confidant, a clandestine sanctuary where, in hushed moments after everyone had gone home, she could revisit the melodies of her past, keeping the vibrant memory of that girl, Agnes Marie, alive. It was a lifeline to a forgotten self, a quiet rebellion against a world that had demanded she choose practicality over passion. "Sister Agnes?" Mr. Harrison's voice broke her reverie, its sharp edge a stark contrast to the distant music in her mind. "Did you hear me? The piano is off limits." She slowly lowered her hands, clasping them in front of her. Her gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment, a spark, hot and resolute, flashed in her aged eyes. It was a spark he missed entirely, focused as he was on her compliant posture. He saw an old woman, easily managed, easily dismissed. He didn't see the girl who once played with a fire that could rival the dawn. He didn't see the woman who had buried a dream but never truly let it die. "I understand, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Rules are rules, I suppose." She turned, her back to him, and walked slowly towards the chapel. Each step was a quiet protest, a silent testament to a heart that refused to be silenced, even when her hands were bound. Mr. Harrison, satisfied, turned to his tablet, already charting the next improvement. He heard the chapel door creak shut and presumed the matter closed. But as Sister Agnes knelt before the altar, the familiar scent of beeswax and old wood filling her senses, a single, clear note, unplayed and unheard by anyone else, resonated in the deepest chambers of her soul. It was a note of defiance, a melody of a truth waiting to be unveiled. And as the chapel doors closed, she knew with an unsettling certainty that the silence Mr. Harrison so aggressively imposed was not an end, but merely a prelude. The silence that enveloped Sister Agnes in the chapel wasn't a balm. It was a drumbeat, insistent and unsettling. The single, clear note she'd felt in her soul resonated now with an urgency she hadn't anticipated. It was the note of a challenge, a truth demanding to be voiced. Mr. Harrison might have assumed the matter closed, but as Agnes knelt, her heart refused to be still. This wasn't just about an old piano. It was about the very spirit of St. Jude's, the quiet dignity of Harmony Creek, and a principle she had long held sacred. That music, like love, was a gift meant to be shared, not locked away. She rose, her joints protesting but her resolve firm. The chapel offered solace, but action called. The common room, when she re-entered it moments later, already felt different, emptier. The sun still streamed through the tall windows, but the air felt heavy, as if anticipating a loss. Mr. Harrison was gone, of course, undoubtedly off to implement another efficiency. But the threat of the piano's removal hung in the air, a physical weight. That afternoon, the first ripples of Mr. Harrison's directive began to spread. Little Lily Thompson, her pigtails bouncing, raced into the common room, her eyes alight. "Sister Agnes, can we play Twinkle, Twinkle today? My mom said I almost got it." Agnes's heart clenched. How to explain to a child the sudden, arbitrary silence? Lily's hopeful gaze, innocent and eager, reflected the raw, pure joy the piano usually brought. "Not today, dear heart," Agnes said, her voice softer than she intended. "Mr. Harrison has, new plans for the piano?" Lily's face crumpled. "But why? It's our piano." Her small hands, usually so confident on the keys, reached out as if to embrace the instrument, protect it. Agnes saw in Lily's face the same bewildered grief she felt herself, a stark reminder of the social justice at stake here, the right of a community to its simple joys, its cultural anchors, its creative outlets. Later, Mrs. Gable, a spry 80-year-old, who came to St. Jude's religiously for the weekly sing-alongs, approached Agnes, a frown etched deeply into her kind face. "Heard about the piano, sister. Is it true? No more hymns? No more Amazing Grace?" Her voice trembled slightly, betraying a fragility Agnes rarely saw. "That music, it's comfort, sister. It's memory. It's what keeps some of us going." Agnes watched the sadness spread through the community like a quiet epidemic. The children, robbed of their musical lessons, drifted aimlessly. The seniors, their weekly ritual disrupted, sat in uncharacteristic quiet, their conversations subdued. The piano, once a beacon of warmth, stood like a silent sentinel, a monument to a joy now denied. And each mournful glance, each whispered question, fueled the embers of Agnes's burgeoning defiance. She remembered, with a vividness that almost took her breath away, the day she'd told her parents she wouldn't pursue her musical scholarship. The weight of their disappointment, carefully hidden behind stoic smiles, had been heavier than any sorrow. "God has other plans for you, Agnes Marie," her mother had said, her eyes glistening. "He will use your gifts in his own way." Agnes had tried to believe it, had dedicated her life to it, but a small, persistent ache had always remained, the ache of a promise unfulfilled. She had chosen sacrifice, chosen service, but had she truly honored the gift? Now, watching Lily's confusion and Mrs. Gable's quiet despair, the ache sharpened into a burning conviction. This wasn't about her lost dreams alone. It was about the dreams of this generation, the solace of this community. To allow the piano to be silenced, to allow its joyful music to be taken away, felt like a betrayal not just of her own past, but of her sacred duty to nurture hope and beauty in the present. The next morning, Mr. Harrison's pronouncements became more concrete. A memo, stark and unforgiving, was posted on the bulletin board. Effective immediately, the common room piano will be removed for storage on Friday, October 27th at 9 a.m. That was just 3 days away. The deadline felt like a countdown to silence. Agnes felt a surge of adrenaline, foreign and exhilarating, ripple through her. She approached Mr. Harrison, finding him in his office, meticulously organizing files. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice steady, "I understand your need for order, but this piano is more than just an object. It was a gift to St. Jude's, specifically for community use. Surely there must be some allowance for its historical and sentimental value." He looked up, his expression already one of weary dismissal. "Sister Agnes, we've been over this. Sentimental value doesn't pay the bills. And as for its being a gift, well, many things were gifts in the past. We live in the present. My decision is final." He turned back to his paperwork, effectively ending the conversation. His dismissal was a cold wall, but Agnes felt a surprising surge of strength, not defeat. As she walked away, a new thought began to coalesce in her mind. A daring, almost audacious idea. What if the piano wasn't just a gift? What if there was something more? A forgotten detail, a specific condition tied to its very existence at St. Jude's. It was a desperate hope, a long shot, but the image of Lily's disappointed face, the echo of Mrs. Gable's trembling voice, spurred her on. She knew where to start looking. The dusty, neglected archives in the basement, a place few ventured since the old Father Michael had passed. It was a labyrinth of forgotten papers, old parish records, and the silent whispers of St. Jude's past. If there was a hidden truth about the Baldwin, it would be there. That evening, long after the last child had been picked up and the last senior had gone home, Sister Agnes descended into the dimly lit basement. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten things. Cobwebs clung to the shelves, and shadows danced in the corners. She found the section labeled Property Donations, Early 20th Century. Her heart hammered with an unfamiliar mix of trepidation and anticipation. Running her finger across the brittle spines of ancient ledgers, she finally pulled one out. Its cover was dark leather, its pages yellowed and fragile. This was it. This was where the answers might lie. She opened the ledger, the faint scent of history rising to meet her. As her eyes scanned the elegant looping script of a bygone era, one entry, dated September 12, 1937, leaped out at her. Her breath caught in her throat. The entry detailed the donation of a Baldwin upright piano, but it was the precise wording that followed, the elegant, almost defiant cursive that made her gasp. This wasn't just a simple gift. This was something far more profound, something that might just change everything. The silence of the basement stretched around her, but in her mind, a powerful chord had just struck. The words blazed from the brittle page, not just as ink on paper, but as a burning declaration that echoed through the quiet depths of Sister Agnes's soul. Donated to St. Jude's Community Center by the Dubois family, specifically for the perpetual musical enrichment and spiritual upliftment of the community, contingent upon its continuous and unrestricted availability within the common room. The name Dubois, her family name. The piano donated by her own parents, not just as a casual gift, but as a covenant. Her breath hitched. The unrestricted availability clause was a direct, undeniable challenge to Mr. Harrison's dictates. A wave of emotion, hot and fierce, washed over Agnes. It wasn't just righteous anger. It was the sting of betrayal, a profound sense of having failed to protect the very legacy her parents had entrusted to the community. They had not only sacrificed their own comforts to give Harmony Creek this instrument, but they had enshrined its purpose in an ironclad agreement, a testament to their belief in music's enduring power. And for decades, that covenant had been honored, quietly, faithfully, until now. Clutching the heavy ledger, Agnes ascended from the basement's shadows into the dim light of the common room. The Baldwin upright seemed to glow, no longer a forgotten antique, but a silent testament, a repository of history and a symbol of defiance. The urgency to act was a physical throb in her temples. The removal was set for Friday, just 2 days away. There was no time to lose. The next morning, with the ledger tucked securely under her arm, Agnes walked directly to Mr. Harrison's office. The air in the community center crackled with the hushed anticipation of the piano's fate. Children eyed it sadly. Seniors whispered worriedly. Everyone sensed a battle brewing, though few knew its true scope. Agnes, however, felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. The quiet nun had found her voice, or rather, the voice of her past. She found Mr. Harrison on the phone, his tone clipped and efficient. He gestured for her to wait, his eyes already conveying his impatience. When he finally hung up, he sighed, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Sister Agnes, I hope you're not here to rehash the piano discussion. My decision is final." Agnes laid the heavy ledger gently on his polished desk, the thud of its age-worn cover resonating louder than she intended. "I am here, Mr. Harrison, to present you with a different perspective, one that I believe supersedes your decision." She opened the ledger to the precise page, her finger pointing to the entry with unwavering certainty. "This is the original donation record for the Baldwin piano. You will note the name of the donors, the Dubois family, and the specific conditions of its gift, Mr." Harrison's practiced smile wavered. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed as he read the elegant script. As his eyes traced the words, "Perpetual musical enrichment, unrestricted availability," the color drained from his face. His confident posture stiffened. The usually unflappable manager suddenly looked like a man caught in a snare. "This is an old document," he finally stammered, his voice lacking its usual authoritative ring. "Legalities change. These clauses might not be enforceable today." He tried to dismiss it, to wave it away with a practiced hand, but the weight of the ledger on his desk felt immovable, its words incontrovertible. "Enforceable or not, Mr. Harrison," Agnes countered, her voice low but firm. "It speaks to the spirit of the donation, the intent of the donors, and the trust placed in St. Jude's. My parents made this gift not as a mere furnishing, but as a living legacy to this community. To remove it, to deny its purpose, would be a profound breach of faith, not just with my family, but with every person in Harmony Creek who has found solace and joy in its music." The personal revelation, the mention of her parents, hung in the air, transforming the bureaucratic dispute into something deeply personal, a dramatic clash of values. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to panic, then irritation, replacing his earlier shock. "Your parents?" he repeated slowly, as if connecting disparate dots. So this isn't just about an old piano for you, is it, sister? It's personal. His tone was accusatory, as if her personal connection somehow invalidated the document's truth. Everything truly meaningful is personal, Mr. Harrison, Agnes replied, her gaze steady, unwavering, especially when it concerns the heart of a community and the legacy of a promise. He slammed his hand on the desk, not in anger, but in frustration. This changes things. This is inconvenient. He picked up the ledger, his fingers tracing the old script, searching for a loophole, a weakness. I'll need to consult with legal counsel. This could be a complex matter. The sudden shift in his demeanor, from dismissive authority to grudging acknowledgement, was a small victory, but Agnes knew it was just the beginning. The legal system, she suspected, would move at a glacial pace, far too slow to save the piano from Friday's deadline. The removal is scheduled for Friday, Agnes reminded him, her voice holding an edge he hadn't heard before. That is 2 days away. There is no time for complex matters when the heart of St. Jude's is on the chopping block. Mr. Harrison stared at her, a strange mix of grudging respect and simmering resentment in his eyes. He realized he had underestimated the elderly nun, had mistaken her quiet demeanor for weakness. He had seen an obstacle. She had become an immovable force, fortified by history and principle. Fine, he bit out, rising abruptly. I will make some calls. But I make no promises, sister. These things take time. And if this document proves to be an empty gesture from the past, the piano will be removed. His tone was a veiled threat, a desperate attempt to regain control. Agnes watched him, her heart thrumming. She knew his words were a delaying tactic, a psychological move to buy time and perhaps find a way around the covenant. He would try to discredit the ledger, find an obscure clause, or simply ignore it. But she also knew she had struck a nerve. The battle was no longer just a local skirmish. It was escalating. The stakes were higher than ever. As she left his office, the ledger still clutched tightly in her hands. She felt a profound sense of urgency mixed with an unsettling premonition. Mr. Harrison would not concede easily. His pride, his carefully constructed efficiency, were now at risk, and that made him dangerous. She had won a small battle, but the war for the soul of St. Jude's, and the music that defined it, had only just begun. The silence she had encountered in the common room before would soon be replaced, one way or another, by either the mournful creak of movers carrying away the piano or a resounding melody of triumph. But she had a terrible feeling that Mr. Harrison had another card to play, one she hadn't anticipated. And as the clock ticked towards Friday, the unspoken fear was, what would it be? The premonition Sister Agnes felt leaving Mr. Harrison's office was not an idle fear. It was a cold, creeping certainty. He wouldn't simply concede. He had too much to lose: his reputation for efficiency, his carefully constructed authority. The ledger, with its inconvenient truth, was a direct affront to his modern sensibilities. Agnes knew, deep in her bones, that he would not fight honorably. He would fight with the tools of his trade, bureaucracy and dismissal. And indeed, the very next morning, a new notice appeared on the St. Jude's bulletin board, strategically placed right beside Mr. Harrison's initial removal memo. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, designed to pacify some while subtly undermining Agnes's revelation. Due to recent inquiries regarding historical documentation, it read, the removal of the common room piano will be temporarily postponed, pending a full legal review of the alleged donation clauses. St. Jude's management is committed to upholding all valid agreements. Further updates will be provided. The word alleged struck Agnes like a chill wind. Valid hung in the air, a thinly veiled challenge. He wasn't backing down. He was simply shifting the battlefield. He intended to drown the truth in red tape, to declare the old ledger null and void through some legal technicality, hoping the community's initial burst of hope would fizzle into resignation. The deadline had been pushed, but the threat remained, now more insidious. The Friday removal was cancelled, but the fight had only just begun, entering a murky labyrinth of legalities. Agnes felt a surge of weariness, a moment of profound doubt. She was an old woman, a nun, not a lawyer. What hope did she have against the intricate machinery of modern corporate policy? She had dedicated her life to faith, to quiet service, not to legal battles. Was this just a delaying tactic until he could find a way to discredit her and the cherished document? But then she saw Lily Thompson, her face still etched with residual sadness, slowly making her way past the silent piano. The little girl paused, reached out a hesitant finger, and traced a dusty curve on its side, a gesture of quiet mourning. And Mrs. Gable sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on the same instrument, her eyes holding a deep-seated longing for the music that once filled the room. In their faces, Agnes saw not just loss, but a quiet plea. And in that plea, her own resolve hardened. She would not let them down. She could not let her parents' legacy be trampled. Agnes realized she needed allies, not just emotional support, but tangible help. She thought of Father Michael, long gone, whose gentle spirit still seemed to echo in the halls. He would have known what to do. He understood the soul of Harmony Creek. He understood the weight of history. Her thoughts turned to George Miller, a retired history professor who volunteered at St. Jude's once a week, helping children with their homework. George was a meticulous researcher, a man who loved old documents and believed fiercely in the power of truth. He might not be a lawyer, but he understood the nuances of historical provenance. She found George in the makeshift library, helping a young boy with a challenging math problem. His spectacles perched on his nose, his gray hair a wild halo around his kind face. He exuded an aura of calm intellect. When Agnes explained the situation, showing him the ledger and Mr. Harrison's dismissive new memo, George's usually placid expression grew taut. He carefully examined the ledger, running a practiced finger over the old paper. "Remarkable," he murmured, his eyes alight with academic interest, then narrowing with concern. The Dubois family, a foundational name in Harmony Creek, and this language, perpetual musical enrichment, unrestricted availability. It's quite precise for its time. A legal scholar would certainly find this compelling evidence of intent. He looked up at Agnes, his gaze firm. "Mr. Harrison is trying to use the obscurity of age to his advantage, sister, to imply that old means invalid. But history often holds more weight than modern convenience." "But how do we prove its validity, George?" Agnes asked, her voice laced with the strain of the ordeal. "He's banking on us not having the resources, the knowledge, to fight this." George tapped the ledger thoughtfully. "We need to corroborate it. Find contemporary accounts, town records, perhaps even old newspaper articles that mention the donation. Show that it was widely known and accepted. Build a case that proves its enduring significance, not just legally, but culturally." He paused, his expression turning serious. "This isn't just about a piano, is it, sister? It's about the soul of this place, The fight for what's truly important. Agnes nodded, a tear prickling at the corner of her eye. It's about a promise, George. A promise made long ago by my parents, to this community. A promise I feel I must now uphold. The revelation of her personal connection, whispered to George, seemed to cement their shared purpose, turning a quiet volunteer into a formidable ally. Their task was daunting. Harmony Creek wasn't a metropolis. Its historical records were scattered, often incomplete. But George, with his historian's zeal, threw himself into the research, Agnes assisting him, guided by her own fading memories and the names of old families mentioned in the ledger. They spent hours sifting through dusty boxes in the town hall archives, poring over microfiche in the tiny local library, searching for any fragment of evidence that would buttress the ledger's truth. Meanwhile, Mr. Harrison remained outwardly composed, maintaining a facade of judicious neutrality, but Agnes noticed the subtle shifts. His calls became more frequent, his whispers with staff more hushed. She knew he was undoubtedly consulting his own legal team, trying to find a counter-argument, a way to dismiss the ledger as a quaint relic with no contemporary power. The pressure was mounting, a quiet psychological warfare playing out in the very halls of St. Jude's. One afternoon, as Agnes and George painstakingly reviewed old newspaper clippings, a particularly damning article from a rival town paper caught George's eye. It was an opinion piece, not a direct report, but its insinuation was chilling. It spoke of a local institution clinging to outdated traditions and of resistance to necessary modernization at St. Jude's, clearly influenced by Mr. Harrison's narrative. It was a subtle, insidious attack on Agnes and the community's values, painted as backward and resistant to progress. "He's trying to frame us, sister," George said, his voice tight with indignation. "To make us seem like the problem, the obstacle to progress." Agnes felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Mr. Harrison wasn't just fighting the ledger. He was fighting the very spirit of Harmony Creek. He was trying to turn public opinion against them, even before the legal review was complete. He was using the modern tools of public relations to undermine the deep-seated, community-driven values Agnes represented. "We need more than just proof, George," Agnes said, her gaze distant, fixed on the silent piano. "We need to show the world what that piano means. We need to remind them of the music, not just the legality." Her mind, usually so focused on prayer and quiet service, was now racing, conjuring images of that young Agnes Marie, fingers flying across the keys, a dream alive in her heart. She knew, with a sudden, startling clarity, that simply proving the ledger's validity might not be enough. They needed to make the community feel the injustice, to reignite the passion for the music itself. But how? How could an old nun and a history professor, armed with dusty papers, fight a man with corporate backing and a public relations strategy? And then, a thought, both terrifying and exhilarating, sparked within her. A way to fight fire with fire. A way to bring the music back, even if just for a moment, before it was silenced forever. But it would mean breaking a vow she had kept for over 60 years, a vow of silence that had shaped her entire adult life. The thought, both terrifying and exhilarating, resonated in Sister Agnes's heart. A way to bring the music back, even if just for a moment, before it was silenced forever. But it would mean breaking a vow she had kept for over 60 years, a vow of silence that had shaped her entire adult life. The idea was audacious, reckless even, and it sent a tremor through her usually placid spirit. For decades, the concert halls and the thunderous applause had been replaced by the quiet rhythm of prayer, the hushed echoes of the convent. Her hands, once destined for grand pianos, had found their purpose in selfless service, intending to the needs of others. The music of Agnes Marie Dubois had been deliberately, lovingly, silenced for the greater good. But now, staring at the silent Baldwin, at the damning newspaper article, at the encroaching shadow of Mr. Harrison's soulless efficiency, Agnes felt a profound shift. The sacrifice she had made, a sacrifice of personal glory for a higher calling, now felt like a debt owed. Not to herself, but to the very community she had sworn to serve. To allow the music to die at St. Jude's was to let a piece of her parents' faith and her own wither. She turned to George, her eyes shining with an intensity that startled him. "George," she began, her voice a whisper, "we need to show them. Not just tell them with documents, but show them what that piano means, what music means to Harmony Creek." George, ever the academic, looked perplexed. "But how, sister? Mr. Harrison has effectively shut down all musical activities, and with the legal review pending, we can't risk defying him directly." "We can't defy him directly," Agnes agreed, "but we can inspire. We can remind them. We can give them a reason to fight." A slow, deliberate resolve settled over her features. "I need to play, George." George's spectacles nearly slipped off his nose. "Play? Sister, I didn't know you played. And even if you do, Mr. Harrison expressly forbade it. He's already demonstrated his willingness to shut down any unauthorized activity." His concern was evident, a genuine fear for the gentle nun. "He forbade unauthorized activities," Agnes corrected, a faint, almost mischievous glint in her eye. "But he cannot forbid a spontaneous moment, a moment of shared memory, a moment of grace." She paused, then confessed, "Before I took my vows, George, before I came to St. Jude's, I was a pianist. It was my passion, my gift." The words, spoken aloud for the first time in decades, felt both liberating and terrifying. It was an admission that breached a deeply personal, long-held silence. George stared at her, utterly stunned. The quiet, unassuming nun, a concert pianist? The revelation hung in the air, transforming their entire understanding of her. Sister Agnes, why did you never say?" "Some promises are made in silence, George," she replied, her gaze drifting to the piano, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "But some promises, it seems, must be broken to protect others." They meticulously planned their spontaneous moment. It couldn't be a formal concert. That would be easily shut down by Mr. Harrison, likely resulting in public humiliation for Agnes and a decisive victory for him. It had to be organic, unexpected, a moment that would resonate emotionally rather than legally. They decided on the weekly community potluck, a tradition that even Mr. Harrison hadn't dared to cancel, though he had shortened it and removed all non-essential entertainment. It was a gathering of the entire community, children, seniors, families, all bound by shared food and unspoken worries about St. Jude's future. The perfect, intimate setting for a quiet rebellion. On the day of the potluck, the common room was buzzing with a muted energy. The usual joyful chatter was replaced by quieter conversations, punctuated by glances at the silent Baldwin. Mr. Harrison circulated, a watchful, almost predatory presence, ensuring no unsanctioned music broke the carefully constructed quiet. Agnes, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation, moved through the room, greeting parishioners, her hands clasped in front of her, hiding the slight tremor. George, meanwhile, had subtly orchestrated his part. He had managed to get Lily's mother and Mrs. Gable to gather a few children and seniors near the piano, ostensibly to admire an old photograph George was explaining. It was a subtle yet effective diversion. As the potluck drew to a close, and Mr. Harrison began his usual closing remarks, a sterile recitation of budget updates and forthcoming improvements, Agnes took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment. She walked purposefully towards the piano, her 80-year-old legs moving with a surprising, almost youthful stride. The murmurs in the room quieted as she approached the forbidden instrument. Mr. Harrison paused mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as he watched her. His face, usually a mask of control, tightened with a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. "Sister Agnes," he said, his voice sharp, a clear warning. "You know the rules." Agnes didn't respond directly. She simply reached out her hands, her gnarled fingers, which had polished countless pews and sorted endless donations, now hovered over the keys. The touch was hesitant at first, a ghost of a caress. Then, with a silent prayer, she sat down. A collective gasp rippled through the common room. Lily's eyes widened. Mrs. Gable clutched her heart. Mr. Harrison took a step forward, his mouth opening to issue a command, a threat. But before he could speak, before the words could leave his lips, Sister Agnes began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, a familiar lullaby that every child in Harmony Creek knew. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. It was imperfect, a little rusty, the old piano's slightly out-of-tune strings echoing the decades of disuse. But with each note, the music swelled, gaining confidence, gaining clarity. The simple children's tune became a complex melody, woven with an intricate counterpoint, a depth and richness that silenced every whisper, every planned protest. The room fell utterly, completely silent. Mr. Harrison, his mouth agape, stood frozen. The notes filled the common room, transforming it from a place of quiet anxiety into a sacred space. Agnes's hands, once hesitant, now moved with an almost ethereal grace, a resurrection of forgotten skill. The music wasn't just a performance, it was a conversation, a prayer, a lament, and a defiant hymn. It was the voice of Agnes Marie Dubois, raw and beautiful, echoing through the halls of St. Jude's, calling forth a past that refused to be forgotten and challenging a future that sought to silence it. The sheer, unexpected virtuosity, the profound emotion pouring from such an unassuming figure, was a shockwave. It wasn't just music. It was a story, told in a language that transcended words, and everyone in that room felt it, down to their very core. Mr. Harrison stood paralyzed, his meticulously planned narrative shattered by a symphony. And then, Agnes shifted, the melody growing more complex, more powerful, pulling everyone deeper into the astonishing depths of her forgotten talent. The music soared, a testament to a lifelong dedication, a secret held close, and a passion now unleashed. What piece would she play next? And what would happen when the music finally ended? The last, lingering note of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," now a complex tapestry of sound, faded into the stunned silence of the common room. The transformation was absolute. Mr. Harrison, still frozen mid-stride, his face a mask of disbelief, seemed to shrink. The parishioners, initially shocked, now held their breath, waiting, their eyes fixed on Sister Agnes, whose frail figure radiated an unexpected power. Agnes closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, a silent invocation, a communion with the past. When she reopened them, there was a fire there, a spark that had lain dormant for decades. Her fingers, no longer tentative, moved with a newfound fluidity, a muscle memory awakened after 60 years. She didn't play another lullaby. Instead, she launched into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. The delicate, haunting melody filled the room, weaving its way through the very fabric of St. Jude's. It was a piece of exquisite beauty, demanding both technical prowess and profound emotional depth. Agnes played with a tenderness that spoke of hidden sorrows and cherished joys, each note a tear, a prayer, a sigh of longing. The old Baldwin, usually a little clunky, seemed to come alive under her touch, its imperfections blending into the richness of her expression. The children, usually restless, sat mesmerized. Lily's mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with wonder. Mrs. Gable wiped a tear from her cheek, her hands clasped to her heart. The seniors leaned forward, captivated, their own memories stirred by the haunting beauty. This wasn't just music. It was a revelation. It was the unveiling of a soul, a testament to a life lived with quiet grace, yet secretly capable of such breathtaking artistry. Mr. Harrison, utterly eclipsed, stood helpless. His face cycled through shock, annoyance, and finally, a dawning realization that he was witnessing something extraordinary, something beyond his spreadsheets and memos. He had sought to silence. She had unleashed a symphony. He had seen an old nun. The community now saw a virtuoso, a keeper of a profound, hidden truth. Agnes's hands danced, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, as if possessed by the music itself. The melody swelled, then softened, rising and falling like a gentle tide. It spoke of youthful dreams deferred, of sacrifice made, of a love for music that had never truly died. It was a deeply personal narrative, laid bare for all to hear, a story woven into every note. The profound emotional resonance of the performance touched everyone, reminding them of their own unspoken dreams, their own buried passions. When the last, ethereal note of the nocturne faded, the silence that followed was even more profound than before. It was a silence filled not with tension, but with awe, with a shared breath, a collective understanding that they had just witnessed a miracle. Then, slowly, hesitantly at first, a single person in the back began to clap. Then another, and another. Soon, the entire common room erupted in a thunderous applause, a standing ovation that shook the very foundations of St. Jude's. Cheers, whistles, and shouts of "Bravo, Sister Agnes!" filled the air. Agnes, her chest heaving slightly, looked up, her eyes misty. She saw the faces of Lily, beaming, Mrs. Gable openly weeping with joy, George, his eyes shining with pride, and in the corner, Mr. Harrison still standing, his arms stiff at his sides, his face a complex mixture of defeat and bewildered respect. He looked utterly lost, his world of order and efficiency suddenly fractured by the sheer, unbridled power of human artistry and emotion. As the applause slowly subsided, Mrs. Gable, emboldened by the moment, stepped forward. "Sister Agnes," she called out, her voice trembling but clear. That was beautiful. We always knew you were special, but, oh my. We always knew this piano had music in it, but we never knew this." She gestured to the piano, then to Agnes. "This is what St. Jude's is, Mr. Harrison. Its heart, its soul, its Sister Agnes and her music." Her words, simple and heartfelt, ignited a spark in the crowd. Other voices joined in, a chorus of appreciation and newfound defiance. "The piano stays!" someone shouted. "Sister Agnes stays!" another yelled. The quiet community of Harmony Creek, awakened by a forgotten melody, was finding its collective voice. The meek had inherited the courage to stand up, not just for an old piano, but for their identity, their history, their very soul. Mr. Harrison, visibly shaken, finally found his voice, though it was weaker than usual. I understand the sentiment, he began, trying to regain control. But rules are rules. The legal review is still pending. This performance was unsanctioned. He tried to dismiss it, to diminish the moment, but his words rang hollow against the lingering echoes of Chopin. Agnes, still seated at the piano, turned to face him, her expression serene but resolute. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice carrying across the quieted room, "some rules are meant to protect, others are meant to suppress. The music you just heard, the joy you just witnessed, this is the very essence of St. Jude's. It is what my parents envisioned when they donated this piano, for the perpetual musical enrichment and spiritual upliftment of the community. That, Mr. Harrison, is not a rule. It is a covenant." She rose slowly, her gaze unwavering. "And I believe deeply that the community agrees. Don't you?" She turned to the crowd, and a resounding chorus of "Yes, Sister Agnes" filled the air, louder and more unified than before. Harrison looked from the determined faces of the community to the silent, powerful nun, then back to the piano. He was clearly outmaneuvered, his rational, sterile world crumbling around him. He had underestimated the power of art, the strength of a community, and the quiet resolve of a woman who had once chosen silence for faith, but was now breaking it for justice. He had no immediate answer, no quick retort. The legal battle would continue, he knew, but now it was personal, public, and fraught with an emotional weight he hadn't anticipated. He turned abruptly, his face pale, and pushed his way through the lingering crowd, exiting the common room without another word. The door closed behind him with a definitive thud, leaving the community to bask in the afterglow of Sister Agnes's performance and the newfound hope it ignited. But as Agnes looked at the piano, a strange feeling washed over her. The extraordinary performance had been a triumph, a moment of profound beauty and defiance. But it had also stirred something else, a longing, a reawakened passion that felt both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. She had broken her vow of silence, not just for St. Jude's, but for herself. And now, the music, once buried, demanded to be heard. The question wasn't just if the piano would stay, but if Agnes, having tasted the intoxicating freedom of performance once more, could ever truly go back to the quiet life she had embraced for so long. The legal battle with Mr. Harrison was one thing, but the battle within her own heart had just begun, and the stakes, for her personally, were higher than ever. Would this newfound voice lead her to a new purpose, or to an unbearable conflict with her vows? The thunderous applause had died down, the last parishioner had departed, and the common room of St. Jude's was once again quiet. But for Sister Agnes, the silence was now a roaring tempest in her soul. The exhilaration of the performance, the surge of defiant joy, had receded, leaving behind a gnawing emptiness, a profound sense of disquiet. She stood alone by the piano, her fingers still tingling from the Chopin, but her heart heavy with the impossible weight of a broken vow. Could she ever truly go back to the quiet life she had embraced for so long? The question echoed in her mind, unforgiving. For 60 years, she had meticulously built her life upon the foundation of her vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. And within that obedience, a deeply personal promise had been made: to lay down her gift, her prodigious talent, at the altar of God's service, to let the silence amplify her prayers. She had given up the world stage for the quiet dignity of a sacred calling. But in playing that music, in reclaiming that part of herself, had she not, in a profound way, betrayed that sacred promise? The next morning, the community buzzed with renewed hope and gratitude. Children approached Agnes, their eyes wide with reverence, asking if she would teach them again. Seniors embraced her, thanking her for bringing life back to St. Jude's. George Miller, his face beaming, assured her that her performance had swayed public opinion irrevocably. "That wasn't just music, sister," he declared. "It was a sermon, a powerful testament to everything St. Jude stands for." Agnes offered gentle smiles, acknowledging their gratitude, but deep down, a tremor of unease persisted. Their praise, while heartfelt, only intensified her internal conflict. They saw a hero. She saw a nun grappling with a profound crisis of faith and identity. Her moment of truth arrived swiftly, as Mr. Harrison, true to form, did not take his public humiliation lightly. He was a man of systems, and when a system was disrupted, he sought to reinforce it, often with merciless efficiency. Instead of confronting Agnes directly, he chose a different, more insidious path. That afternoon, a formal letter arrived from the diocese. It wasn't a casual inquiry. It was a summons. Sister Agnes was requested to appear before the diocesan council next week to discuss recent events at St. Jude's Community Center and their alignment with the order's established protocols and Sister Agnes's vows of obedience. The language was polite, but the implications were chilling. Mr. Harrison had clearly escalated the matter, framing her performance not as a defense of a community, but as an act of insubordination, a breach of her religious duties. He had skillfully turned her moment of triumph into a theological problem, pitting her against the very institution she had served her entire life. Agnes stared at the letter, her hands trembling. This wasn't just about the piano anymore. This was about her life's calling, her place in the world. The diocese held the power to remove her from St. Jude's, to reassign her, or even, in the most extreme cases, to question her suitability for religious life. The air grew thin, the weight of the letter crushing. She sought out George immediately, the letter clutched in her hand like a death warrant. George read it, his face paling, the usually unflappable academic looking genuinely distraught. "This is a direct attack, sister," he said, his voice tight with anger. "He's not just going after the piano. He's going after you. He's trying to discredit you, to isolate you." Agnes sank into a chair, the full weight of her situation pressing down on her. "But did I not break my vow, George?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, "to choose the music, even for a moment, over the explicit instruction of a superior? Is that not disobedience?" Her eyes, usually so serene, were filled with a profound anguish, a fear that transcended her personal comfort. George knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Sister Agnes, you chose to defend the spirit of St. Jude's. You chose to honor a covenant, a legacy. You brought joy and hope back to a community that was losing its way. Is that truly disobedience? Or is it a higher form of service, a truer expression of God's love?" His words offered a sliver of comfort, but the internal battle raged. She remembered the day she took her final vows, the white veil, the solemn promise, the profound sense of surrendering her will, her very self, to God's plan. And part of that surrender had been the silent, agonizing farewell to Agnes Marie Dubois, the concert pianist. She had believed, with every fiber of her being, that God would use her in other ways, that her gifts would find a new, quieter purpose. The music had become a sacred, unspoken sorrow, a cherished memory she occasionally revisited in her mind, but never, ever, with her hands. Until now. The summons from the diocese was not just a bureaucratic hurdle, it was a tribunal of her very soul. She would have to explain her actions, justify her choices, and perhaps face the consequence of her reawakened passion. And as she pondered the formidable figures she would face, bishops, mother superiors, stern canon lawyers, she knew her gentle defense of a piano might not be enough. They would see a nun who had disobeyed, a sister who had put personal expression above institutional obedience. But then, a different voice resonated in her memory. Not the severe tones of the diocese, but the loving, proud voice of her father. God has blessed you with a gift, Agnes Marie. Use it to bring light to the world. And her mother's gentle hand, guiding hers on the keyboard. Music is God's voice, child. Never let it be silenced. The truth was, in those moments at the piano, playing for her community, she had felt closer to God than she had in years. She had seen His grace in the children's wonder, in the seniors' tears, in the unified voice of Harmony Creek. Had her act truly been one of disobedience, or had it been a deeply spiritual affirmation, a reawakening of a purpose she had long believed was buried? The conflict tore at her. She had to prepare for the council, to articulate her position, to defend not just the piano, but her very faith and calling. This wasn't just a legal review. It was an inquisition into her soul. And as she looked at the letter again, one phrase echoed with terrifying clarity: their alignment with the order's established protocols and Sister Agnes's vows of obedience. The very foundation of her life was being called into question, and she had only days to prove that her rebellion was, in fact, an act of faith. How could she possibly argue that? What truth could she offer that would satisfy both her conscience and the strictures of her sacred vows? Her future, her very identity, hung in the balance. How could she possibly argue that her rebellion was, in fact, an act of faith? Her future, her very identity, hung in the balance. The question tormented Sister Agnes through sleepless nights. The formal summons from the diocese was a physical weight, pressing down on her spirit. She knew the power of the council, stern, unyielding, guided by centuries of tradition and canon law. She was not just defending a piano. She was defending her very soul, her understanding of faith, against an institution she had sworn to obey. George Miller, ever the loyal ally, tried to rally support. He circulated a petition among the community, detailing Mr. Harrison's attempts to remove the piano and Sister Agnes's heroic defense. Hundreds of signatures poured in, from Lily's scrawled name to Mrs. Gable's elegant script. The people of Harmony Creek, awakened by Agnes's music, were ready to stand with her. George even tried to contact a local pro bono lawyer, but the diocese was a formidable opponent, and few dared to challenge its internal workings. Agnes, however, knew that petitions and legal arguments, while important, would not be enough. This wasn't a court of civil law, it was a religious tribunal. She needed to speak to their hearts, to their understanding of God's love and grace, not just their regulations. The day of the hearing arrived, cloaked in a crisp autumn chill. Agnes traveled to the diocesan headquarters, a grand, imposing stone building in the nearest city, far removed from the humble warmth of St. Jude's. George accompanied her, his presence a silent strength, but he knew his role was merely supportive. Agnes would face this trial alone. She was led into a large, somber room. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the space, behind which sat three figures: Bishop Davies, a man of imposing stature and grave expression; Mother Superior Eleanor, whose sharp eyes missed nothing; and Father Thomas, the diocesan canon lawyer, his demeanor cold and analytical. Mr. Harrison sat off to the side, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face, a silent prosecutor. "Sister Agnes," Bishop Davies began, his voice deep and resonant, "thank you for appearing before us. We are here to address serious concerns regarding your conduct at St. Jude's Community Center, specifically your public defiance of management and an alleged breach of your vows of obedience." Agnes, her heart pounding, took a deep breath. She wasn't the young Agnes Marie Dubois anymore, trembling before a panel of music critics. She was Sister Agnes, a woman forged by decades of prayer, service, and quiet resilience. "Your Excellencies, Mother Superior," she began, her voice clear, though tinged with the tremor of her 78 years. "I understand the gravity of the accusations, and I stand before you not to deny my actions, but to explain them in the light of my deepest convictions." Father Thomas, ever the pragmatist, interjected. "Sister, Mr. Harrison's directive regarding the piano was clear. Your public performance was a direct act of insubordination. Your vows demand obedience to your superiors. And my vows also demand fidelity to the spirit of my calling, Father," Agnes countered, meeting his gaze. "To serve God, and through him, his people. My parents, when they donated the Baldwin piano to St. Jude's, did so with the specific intent for the perpetual musical enrichment and spiritual upliftment of the community. That was a sacred covenant, not a mere suggestion. Mr. Harrison sought to violate that covenant, to silence a source of joy and solace for the very community we are called to serve." Mother Superior Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "But sister, even if the piano's donation had such conditions, your methods were not in keeping with your vow of obedience. You were told to desist. You chose to defy. Is that not an act of pride, an elevation of your own will above the order's authority?" The question cut deep, striking at the very core of her internal struggle. "Mother Superior," Agnes replied, her voice softening, "I ask you to consider the nature of that defiance. For 60 years I have honored my vows. I laid down my gift, my talent for music, believing it was God's will for me to serve in silence. But in the quiet of my heart, I always believed that music was a divine language, a conduit for grace." She paused, looking at each of their faces, then at Mr. Harrison, who shifted uncomfortably. When Mr. Harrison sought to silence the piano, he was not just silencing an instrument. He was silencing the laughter of children learning their first notes, the comfort of seniors singing hymns, the very pulse of communal joy in St. Jude's. He was silencing a sacred trust. And in that moment, I realized that my obedience to a mere man's arbitrary rule would be a greater disobedience to God's purpose, to the spirit of my parents' gift, and to the needs of his people in Harmony Creek. Bishop Davies spoke then, his voice less accusatory, more reflective. "And your performance, sister, you displayed a remarkable talent, one most believed you had long forsaken. Was that not also an act of personal expression, rather than an act of service?" Agnes looked at her hands, then back at the bishop. "Your Excellency, when I played that music, I did not play for personal glory. I played to rekindle hope, to remind the community of the beauty they were losing, and to show Mr. Harrison that some things cannot be quantified by budgets or silenced by memos. In that moment, the music was not mine. It was God's. It flowed through me, a prayer, a plea for justice, a reminder of His enduring grace in a world that often forgets it. A profound silence filled the room. Mr. Harrison looked agitated, his prepared arguments rendered impotent by Agnes's heartfelt sincerity. Father Thomas began to open a legal file, but Bishop Davies held up a hand, stopping him. "Sister Agnes," Bishop Davies said, his gaze fixed on her, "you have presented a unique and deeply personal interpretation of your vows. This is not a simple matter." He turned to Mother Superior Eleanor. "What is your counsel, Mother?" Mother Superior Eleanor, who had observed Agnes with an almost unnerving intensity, finally spoke. Sister Agnes's actions, while unorthodox, stemmed from a place of deep spiritual conviction. Her performance, by all accounts, reignited faith and unity in a community under duress. It seems, Bishop, that she chose to obey the spirit of her vows over the letter of a manager's directive. The question, then, is whether her gifts, once silenced, were truly meant to remain so, or if God has called her to a new, albeit unexpected, form of service. Bishop Davies nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Indeed, Sister Agnes, your case presents us with a dilemma of profound significance. However, given the nature of the accusations and the potential precedent, we cannot make a hasty decision. We will deliberate. You will be informed of our judgment within the week." Agnes felt a pang of both relief and dread. A week. Her fate, and perhaps the piano's, would hang in the balance. But as she looked at Mr. Harrison's crestfallen face and felt the quiet strength of George's presence behind her, she knew she had spoken her truth. She had laid her heart bare. As she was escorted out, the solemn faces of the council members etched in her memory, she wondered if her truth, her deeply personal interpretation of faith and obedience, would be enough to save not only the piano, but also her very identity as a nun. What would a week of deliberation mean for St. Jude's? And what unknown future awaited her, should the council decide her powerful yet rebellious act of faith was a step too far? What would a week of deliberation mean for St. Jude's? And what unknown future awaited her, should the council decide her powerful yet rebellious act of faith was a step too far? The 7 days that followed Sister Agnes's appearance before the diocesan council stretched into an eternity. Each ticking moment felt like a drumbeat, counting down to a verdict that would either redeem her and the community, or shatter everything she held dear. Harmony Creek held its breath, a palpable tension settling over the small town. The common room, with its silent Baldwin, became a place of quiet vigil, its fate entwined with Agnes's. Agnes herself moved through her days in a haze of internal conflict. The praise from the community, once a comfort, now felt like a heavy cloak. Lily still looked at her with adoring eyes, asking when she could play again, and Mrs. Gable still offered whispered words of encouragement. But Agnes knew the weight of her choices. She spent hours in the chapel, not just in prayer for the outcome, but in a profound introspection, grappling with the echoes of her past self, Agnes Marie Dubois, and the nun she had become. Had she acted out of spiritual conviction, or a deeply buried longing for the music she had forsaken? The line felt impossibly thin, blurring her sense of purpose. Mr. Harrison, meanwhile, did not remain idle. The public humiliation at the potluck, coupled with Agnes's eloquent defense before the council, had wounded his pride deeply. He could not directly challenge the council's process, but he could make a final, desperate move to undermine Agnes and solidify his position. The very next day, a new, starkly official notice was posted at St. Jude's. not on the bulletin board, but on the main entrance. It announced that, due to unforeseen circumstances and a comprehensive review of St. Jude's operational inefficiencies, Mr. Harrison was implementing a temporary pause on all non-essential community programs, effective immediately. This included the children's after-school program, the seniors' social hour, and the community food bank run by volunteers. He carefully avoided mentioning the piano directly, but the message was clear. Defy him, and the community would suffer. A ripple of shock and anger spread through Harmony Creek. The children's parents were distraught. The seniors felt isolated. The food bank, a lifeline for many struggling families, was suddenly shuttered. Mr. Harrison's move was a calculated, cruel blow designed to pressure Agnes and turn the community against her. He was using the vulnerable as pawns in his power struggle, a stark betrayal of the very purpose of a community center. George Miller was furious. "He's punishing the community, sister," he exclaimed, waving the notice. "He's trying to starve them of their services, hoping they'll blame you for rocking the boat." He immediately began organizing a protest, a peaceful demonstration outside St. Jude's. Agnes felt a fresh surge of anguish. Her defense of the piano, her act of faith, had inadvertently led to this. The very people she sought to protect were now suffering, caught in the crossfire of a bureaucratic battle. Was this the consequence of her rebellion? Had she caused more harm than good? The day before the council's verdict was due, the protest swelled. Dozens of Harmony Creek residents, from young mothers pushing strollers to elderly men leaning on canes, gathered silently outside St. Jude's. They carried handmade signs, "Bring back our programs," "St. Jude's is our home," and "Music matters." Their quiet, dignified presence was a powerful testament to their love for their community and their defiance of Mr. Harrison's oppressive tactics. Agnes watched from the chapel window, her heart aching. Their courage, their loyalty, fueled her resolve, but also intensified the weight of her responsibility. If the council ruled against her, what would become of these people? What would become of St. Jude's? Just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the protest, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. It was Bishop Davies's personal vehicle. A wave of nervous whispers rippled through the crowd. This was it. The verdict. Bishop Davies emerged from the car, his expression unreadable. Mother Superior Eleanor followed, her gaze sweeping over the gathered community. The air crackled with a profound tension. They had come in person, a sign that the decision was significant, perhaps even controversial. Agnes walked out to meet them, her habit rustling in the cool evening breeze, George by her side. The crowd parted, creating a path, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Bishop Davies addressed the crowd first, his voice solemn. "My children, we understand your concerns, and we have taken your sentiments and Sister Agnes's testimony into deep consideration." He then turned to Agnes, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Sister Agnes, the Diocesan Council has reached a decision regarding your conduct and the future of St. Jude's Community Center." The entire community held its breath. Agnes braced herself, her heart thumping against her ribs. This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of struggle, decades of silence, a lifetime of faith. "First," Bishop Davies continued, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet, "the Council has thoroughly reviewed the Dubois family's original donation covenant for the Baldwin piano. We find the language regarding perpetual musical enrichment and spiritual upliftment to be legally sound and morally binding. Therefore, Mr. Harrison's attempt to remove the piano is deemed a violation of this sacred trust. The piano will remain in the common room, and its use for community programs is hereby reinstated. A collective gasp, then a cheer, erupted from the crowd. Tears welled in Agnes's eyes. The piano was saved. Her parents' legacy was protected. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. George squeezed her hand, his face radiating joy. But Bishop Davies raised a hand, silencing the burgeoning celebration. His expression remained grave. However, he continued, the council also addressed the matter of Sister Agnes's direct defiance of managerial authority and her public performance, which, while deeply moving, was an unauthorized act by a professed nun. The vow of obedience is central to our order. Agnes's relief evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. She knew this part was coming, the personal cost. Therefore, Bishop Davies announced, his voice firm, the council has determined that Sister Agnes will be transferred. Effective immediately, you will be reassigned from St. Jude's Community Center. The words struck Agnes like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. Transferred, removed from her home of 50 years, from her community. The joy of the piano's reprieve instantly overshadowed by the crushing weight of her own banishment. The crowd groaned, a collective cry of dismay, their celebrations turning to sorrow. She had saved the piano, but at what cost? And as she looked at Bishop Davies, her heart aching, he added one final enigmatic sentence, a revelation that spun her world on its axis, leaving her utterly breathless. Your new assignment, Sister Agnes, will be as the head of the Diocesan School of Music. Your new assignment, Sister Agnes, will be as the head of the Diocesan School of Music. The words hung in the twilight, shimmering with an impossible, breathtaking light. Sister Agnes felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not from weakness, but from the sheer, stunning force of the revelation. Transferred, yes, but not exiled, not silenced. Instead, a door had opened to a future she had buried 6 decades ago. It was a punishment, yet the most profound grace. A second chance, offered by the very institution that had called her to sacrifice her gift. A hushed gasp, then a wave of understanding, rippled through the gathered community. Cheers of relief mixed with murmurs of sadness. They would lose their beloved Sister Agnes, but she was not lost. She was being elevated, her unique talent recognized in a way no one could have predicted. Bishop Davies, seeing the stunned expression on Agnes's face, stepped forward. Sister Agnes, he said, his tone softened. Your act of defiance was indeed a breach of the letter of obedience. However, the council, particularly Mother Superior Eleanor, saw in your actions not pride, but a profound spiritual conviction. Your defense of the piano, of your parents' covenant, and your ability to stir the hearts of a community speaks to a higher calling. Your gift, once suppressed, brought undeniable light and hope. We believe it is God's will that this gift now be used to inspire, to teach, and to uplift on a broader scale, within the embrace of the Church. Mother Superior Eleanor, her sharp eyes now warm with a rare smile, added, the Diocesan School of Music has long sought a leader with both deep faith and exceptional musicality. Your performance, Sister Agnes, proved to us that you possess both in abundance. This is not banishment. It is an assignment suited to your true, God-given talents. Agnes looked from the bishop to Mother Superior, then to George, whose face was a mixture of tearful pride and utter amazement. And finally, her gaze fell upon Mr. Harrison, who stood utterly defeated. His jaw hung slack, his perfectly composed world shattered by an outcome so utterly outside his realm of sterile efficiency. His attempts to silence had resulted in a symphony, not just of music, but of justice and redemption. Agnes turned back to the community, her heart swelling with a bittersweet emotion. Her home, her St. Jude's, her quiet haven, would no longer be hers. But her calling, the very essence of her soul, was being given new life. "My dear friends," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I will miss you more than words can say. Harmony Creek, St. Jude's, you have been my life, but I promise you, the music will not stop. It will only grow louder and reach further." The following days were a whirlwind of goodbyes, packing, and preparing for the transition. The community rallied around her, showering her with love and support. Lily, with a crayon-drawn picture of Agnes at the piano, clung to her. Mrs. Gable, her eyes brimming, pressed a hand-knitted shawl into Agnes's arms. "You showed us what faith truly means, sister," she whispered. "Thank you for the music." Mr. Harrison, stripped of his authority over the common room and its programs, found his position at St. Jude's untenable. The diocese, in a subtle but firm move, informed him that his interim management would not be made permanent. He left St. Jude's as quietly as he had arrived, his vision of modernization defeated by an old ledger and a nun's unexpected piano concerto. He was replaced by a kind, community-focused manager who immediately reinstated all the suspended programs, ensuring St. Jude's truly lived up to its name. Agnes's last visit to the common room was a poignant one. She sat at the Baldwin, her fingers tracing the familiar keys. It was still a little out of tune, still imperfect, but now it sang with the triumph of a community's heart. She played a final, gentle melody, a soft improvisation that wove together her 50 years at St. Jude's, her parents' love, and the burgeoning hope for Harmony Creek. Leaving St. Jude's was like tearing a page from her own history. But as she drove away, past the familiar fields and hills of Harmony Creek, Agnes felt a sense of profound peace. Her journey had been one of sacrifice, quiet service, and a long-held silence. But fate, or perhaps divine intervention, had orchestrated a second chance, a redemption that transcended her wildest dreams. The Diocesan School of Music was a grand, modern building, a stark contrast to the rustic charm of St. Jude's. But its halls hummed with the vibrant energy of young musicians, their passion a constant reminder of the gift she had once laid down. As she stepped into her new office, a polished grand piano stood in the corner, gleaming under the sunlight streaming through the large windows. She walked towards it, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Her fingers, no longer gnarled with doubt, reached out and touched the keys. The touch was firm, confident. She closed her eyes, remembering her parents' faces, Lily's wonder, Mrs. Gable's tears, and the unified voice of Harmony Creek. She remembered the silence she had kept, and the music that had finally broken through. She began to play, not Chopin this time, but a simple, heartfelt hymn, one that spoke of gratitude, of unexpected blessings, and of the enduring power of faith. The notes filled the room, pure and resonant, a testament to a life that had come full circle. Agnes Marie Dubois, the concert pianist, and Sister Agnes, the devoted nun, had finally merged, becoming a single, harmonious soul. She was no longer just protecting music. She was leading it, nurturing it, ensuring its perpetual enrichment for generations to come. Her life, she realized, was a melody composed by God Himself, full of unexpected twists, dramatic crescendos, and quiet, poignant harmonies. And as the music swelled, filling the beautiful, sunlit room, Sister Agnes knew, with absolute certainty, that her greatest composition was yet to be written. The silence had been broken, and the world was now ready to listen. Her journey had been a powerful reminder that sometimes the truest path to obedience lies in the courage to challenge, and that the most profound gifts, once buried, can be resurrected to stunning effect, echoing God's grace and stunning the world with their enduring power. The story of Sister Agnes was only just beginning, a testament to what one woman, armed with faith and an unbreakable spirit, could achieve. And somewhere, in the quiet heart of Harmony Creek, the Baldwin piano in the common room seemed to sing along, a silent, joyful counterpoint to her triumphant return to the music. And so the journey of Sister Agnes, the elderly nun who found her voice and her purpose anew, concludes. Her story reminds us that true strength isn't always found in grand gestures, but in the quiet courage to protect what is sacred. It teaches us that gifts, once buried, can be resurrected to stunning effect, igniting hope and challenging the very structures that seek to silence them. Sister Agnes's defiance wasn't just for an old piano. It was for the soul of a community, a testament to the idea that some covenants are more powerful than any corporate decree, and some melodies, once heard, can never be forgotten. Her triumph speaks to the enduring power of faith, the resilience of the human spirit, and the profound impact one person can have when they choose to stand for justice and beauty. It's a story of second chances, of finding one's true calling, even when it means breaking a long-held silence. May Sister Agnes's symphony inspire us all to listen for the music in our own lives, to cherish our communities, and to never let our God-given gifts be silenced. If this story resonated with you, if Sister Agnes's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. Stories that remind us of the incredible human spirit and the extraordinary grace that surrounds us. Thank you for listening.